First, just a comment. Thanks for sharing your experiences as autistic mothers. My wrong impression, my assumption was that it actually might be easier because I thought that you had shared some insight that I was missing when I parent my daughter in a social group with other mothers, and some of those mothers are autistic and some are not. And I'm wondering, after hearing your experiences today with some social anxiety around those kinds of things, what can we do to support each other in a way that would make that easier for everybody to enjoy what we're doing?
I think one thing I did want to say to your comment was that I know that I talked about challenges, but there are some aspects of being an autistic mother of an autistic child that are benefits in a strange way. And they help me to understand my son a lot better. I think that every mother knows their child best, but I think in this particular situation for myself, his needs and his challenges are met in a different way because I understand the depth of them in a different way than most would. As far as the anxieties and getting that kind of manageable in order to kind of facilitate a better way of getting out of that kind of gray area and in out. I'm still working on that myself every day. I think it would be nice to see somewhat of a social group for mothers who struggle with autism, and maybe in our Lower Mainland area. I'm not familiar with any of them, if there are any. I know of a lot of Facebook groups for parents and autistic women, but I'm not personally familiar with any for mothers. So it would be nice.
Yes, I was wondering if any of you have been looked at in like a different lens than so-called neurotypical mothers, like where you feel you're treated. I had a friend, she was treated kind of more looked at, like scrutinized for things that she felt that others would just have been let go about because they thought that it was like based on her autism and not just something a mother would do, which she felt that most mothers would struggle, but they scrutinized her much more and they like basically threatened her to take her kids away. Has that ever happened to any of you? Or?
I think, thankfully it hasn't happened very often for me. And I think that maybe part of my disability kind of causes me this blindness to what people think about me. But I have had a couple people kind of question or make comments about like, oh, you actually love your kid, you know, like it was like almost shocking. And yeah, obviously, like I love my child. I think any parent does, no matter what their struggles are. And yeah.
I have a question here from one of our online participants. And the question is, did you ladies really find that your autism characteristics came out more when you became a parent? I think the point about this was the stress of being a parent. Did that also, because being a parent is very stressful. For example, heightened sensory difficulties, anxiety, etc. Or did you really feel that it's always been apparent since you were young that you had autism and you just realized it primarily through your child's diagnosis? So was it the anxiety of being a parent or the stressors of being a parent that made you realize this, or was it always there and it helped you?
I was a very young mom the first time around. So I don't think that being a parent was what brought out my autistic self. It's always been there in some form or another. I think this masking and this camouflaging is something that I learned at a very young age, and it was something that is, again, it weighs a benefit and it's a negative, and there's a fine line there between the two. Utilizing it in a way that is effective for you and not a detriment is hard and challenging to do. But I don't think that that being a mom was what made me realize or notice that I was autistic. It was something that's always been there. I think that researching, again, when you have a child that you start to notice some peculiarities with, you start to understand things from a whole new view that you may not have had about yourself prior to that, or you may not have recognized so much at the time as one thing, and that in itself kind of led to the diagnosis of autism, but not so much the actual autism. I think that was always there, so I don't know if that helps.
Okay. For me, I think I always knew that I was different, and I didn't really quite understand what that meant exactly. And I was never shy about kind of looking for the answers, and whether that meant going to counseling or that meant reading books about self-discovery or things like that. My first diagnosis I received was for post-traumatic stress and anxiety, which I can totally understand, like based on my life experiences. But then afterwards, I still felt that there was something missing. There was something that couldn't be explained by those diagnoses. And yeah. And then, having a child, I think, did help me find myself a little bit more, and then eventually led to my diagnosis of ASD, following my son's. So I don't know if that answers the question, but. Yeah.
For the mothers that received their diagnosis after their children were diagnosed, where did you guys go, and what was that process like for you?
I went to see Grace. And it was a good process. I actually went because my 10-year-old needed a diagnosis, and she presented as a female phenotype, not a male phenotype, so I wanted somebody who is familiar with girls and women on the spectrum. So I looked on Facebook and found some different names, and then I thought, well, if she gets it right with me, I'll take my daughter. So that's what we did. We both went. But there are a few people, not a lot though, that I could find that diagnose adults in general and women in particular. So.
Yes, of course. My journey towards a diagnosis was really unsettling. I thought that once I had discovered this information, that just really reflected my whole life and everything that I was or am. That it would be easy, that I could just go in and I could say, like, look, this is what I found and this is what I need, And I think some of the responses I got from doctors were generally unhelpful, but there were some that were like almost traumatic, like going in and being laughed at was a really hard thing for me because it took so much to just go in and just to say it out loud, And then I kind of had given up a little bit and lost that motivation, and then I just picked up my bootstraps and I went online and I found information from Autism Canada, and I just directly emailed their executive director and just told them, like, this is what I've gone through, this is what I found, this is what I need. And they directed me towards Dr. Anthony Bailey, who thankfully just was able to see who I really was and to give me an accurate diagnosis.
I would just like to, one of the biggest things over the years, the most difficult calls that we've received at ACT, and we've had hundreds of them, is from adults looking for a diagnosis. And Dr. Bailey and Dr. Irochi are two of a handful, if even a handful, of diagnosticians for the province of British Columbia. It is dire. And there are many adults, both male and female, who may suspect that they have autism, and they may know that there are actually very few resources or services if they receive a diagnosis, but would like to have the opportunity to work with a professional to understand. And so that's, I think, a really dire priority for the province. There's one more question I have here from the online audience, and that is, how many of you on the panel with autism recognize that you consciously or subconsciously camouflage growing up? I mean, having listened to Dr. Mandy's talk this morning and this afternoon, that whole consciously, subconsciously, did you all do that as children, the three females on the panel? And has that changed at all since you've had a diagnosis? And perhaps some reflections on what Dr. Mandy had to say.
Yeah, I think especially in retrospect, I was always a quiet child, and I would observe. I would always be kind of at the back of a room, and I would just be looking and watching, and I would see maybe people that I really respected that were kind to people and how they moved around the room and how they spoke to people. And yeah, I would definitely have learned from that and copied. And I think without even, I was just talking to Dr. Bailey on break, and one of my special interests that have kind of continued since I was very, very young has been like art and painting and drawing and stuff. And I've kind of gone through this series of paintings and stuff since my diagnosis where all these people that I've been painting have masks on. And I never really realized the significance of that maybe, and how unconsciously maybe that's come out to reflect back as a mirror, like, yeah. That's interesting.
Okay, for myself only. As a child, I think it was very subconscious. Looking back in retrospect, I think as a child, it was very, very subconscious, something I wasn't aware that I was doing until I got older. And older, I'd say, probably the earliest recollection of that I could say was probably around 10. And it was when we were at a family event, and my mother had made a comment of how miserable I looked. And I wasn't a smiling child. I have deep smile lines because I've practiced that a lot, and I hold it in a great position. So it's very skilled at my age now. But I would go home and practice, and I didn't know what happiness looked like. What does happy look like to you? Because I feel happy, I'm not unhappy. I was very confused by that, by those comments that would be brought to my attention, and I wouldn't understand that. And so I would practice that at home, smiling. Is this what happy looks like? Okay. It was something I did a lot, and I got better at it, I think, as time went on. But I think as far as camouflaging, I think, as I've had a conversation with Dr. Bailey about that, everyone does it. I don't think it's just autistic people that do it. I think we all do it as human beings. I think that we develop that skill in order to kind of try to find a place amongst those that we don't really feel we fit into. I know that's what I did, and I still do it. I did it. I always say when I leave my house, I put my act on, because I have to pretend to be what is expected or who is expected. It's not generally it's not myself, it's not me, but I've learned how to sort of act that way. And it gets you by, I guess, is the best way to put that. Would be nice to live in a world where I didn't have to do that and I could just be who I wanted to be, but I don't think that we're quite there yet. Another thing that I just wanted to say to that was that I watched a lot of soap operas as a child, not by my own doing, but by family members around me, and I just want to put a warning out there that it's not really the best It's probably not the best social skill learning tool for an autistic female because it can create a very negative effect as well. So I just a word of caution there. So.